Alrighty, our next session is 2024 Research Breakthroughs Launching Hope from the Lab Bench to the Bedside, and will be led by Dr. Sarah Hernandez from the Hereditary Disease Foundation. Following this session, there will be a 10-minute movement break. Please welcome Dr. Hernandez. Welcome back.
I have to say, it's awkward to be here with real doctors and be called a doctor, so I'm not an MD. So please defer your medical questions to Victor and not me. I appreciate that he gave you that fabulous update. Okay, I'll wait for my slides. All right, hi everyone, my name is Sarah. I'm really excited to be here with you today to talk about some of the research breakthroughs that we've had this year that will really help us launch hope from the bedside, from the lab bench to the bedside. And so I thought I would tell you this story by breaking it up into three separate parts. Where I see hope in the clinic, where I see hope in ongoing experiments that are currently in cell and mouse models, and in exciting ideas that are coming from various labs across the globe that study Huntington's. But before I tell you about all this exciting work, this is my first HSG conference, and there's a lot of new faces in the audience for me, so I thought I would start by telling you a little bit about who I am, what I do, and how I got here. So my passion for HD research has always been driven by my family. My grandmother was the first person in my family to be accurately diagnosed with Huntington's disease. She inherited the gene from her mother, but maybe some of you can sympathize. This was at a time when we knew a lot less about HD, and so she was sequestered to a mental institution. It wasn't until my grandmother was 42 years old, highly symptomatic, with 5 children, that our family learned what was really going on. And so one of her children was my mother, to whom I was born in 1984, when there was still shockingly little known about this disease. It wasn't until 1985, actually, that we learned that Huntington's couldn't skip generations. And so I hope you can appreciate, with everything that Victor just told you, how far we've really come. And so when I was about 12 years old, looking utterly disgusted in front of this birthday cake, it became clear that something was going on in my family, but nobody wanted to talk about it. So I was left home alone after school one day after school, and I found a VHS tape that just said Huntington's disease on the spine of the tape. So I put it in the VCR, and I saw none other than Dr. Nancy Wexler and the Gene Hunters. And they were in Venezuela trying to understand what the cause of Huntington's was. And that video really changed the trajectory of my entire life, because I became obsessed with learning more about Huntington's. And so all I could ever find were really blurbs and textbooks, and it was never enough. And so this obsession led me to getting my PhD so that I could learn more and so that I could contribute to the research. And so I've had really fantastic full circle moments in my life since then. I went on to do my postdoc with Dr. Leslie Thompson, who's shown here with this little arrow. She was a member of the Gene Hunters. She went to Venezuela to try and find the gene. And so she is an absolute pioneer in HD research. She leads one of the top HD labs in the world. I also now work for the Hereditary Disease Foundation. This is an organization that was founded by Nancy Wexler, the very woman I saw on that tape. And so she and her family founded the HDF to try and to learn more about Huntington's. And it was really Nancy that was the catalyst that got all of the HD researchers together and convinced them to go to Venezuela and work with the families to try and understand HD. And I can tell you, in other research fields, there's very much this me against you mentality. It's competitive. People are working against each other to try and find the same answers. But it was Nancy who understood we all have the same goal, and we'll get there faster if we work together. So instead of the me against you mentality, she fostered this us against HD mentality. And I can tell you that collaborative spirit is something that still exists in the HD field today. And so it's pretty amazing that I get to work for the organization that's run by the absolute legend who truly taught me what Huntington's is. And this is a picture of me with Nancy and Leslie at the 2018 HDSA convention in LA. And so, at the Hereditary Disease Foundation, which you will hear me call the HDF, I'm the Director of Research Programs. And I don't want to make you feel bad, and I don't want to make you feel jealous, but it is the best job that there is, and it is mine. So what I essentially get to do is all things science-y at the foundation. I get to learn about all of the latest Huntington's disease research. I get to help fund really cool HD research projects, and I get to meet all of the young up-and-coming HD investigators. The sole mission of the HDF is to find and fund promising HD research that will get us to a treatment. And we do that not only by funding research, but by supporting researchers and HD families. So we have webinars, which are in a free online format. They're a way for researchers to disseminate their work to the greater HD community. We host scientific conferences every other year. This August, we had a conference with almost 300 of the world leaders in HD research. These were people from 16 different countries. They represented 105 total institutions. They were from 80 universities and 25 pharmaceutical companies. So there was a whole lot of science being shared very collaboratively at this meeting. And we also host workshops. So these are small format meetings that get into the nitty-gritty of scientific details. We invite the world leaders on those topics together to talk about that science, how it could be impacted by Huntington's, and to help define experiments that could drive that forward and form collaborations. And of course, we fund science. In 2023, we spent 85% of all donations on research. And in the past 8 years, we've given almost $17 million in grants and fellowships to over 100 recipients. And we do that through two funding mechanisms. So we have our annual awards, which are research grants of $100,000 given over 1 year, and postdoctoral fellowships, which are $200,000 for 2 years. In the past 5 years, with this one funding mechanism, we've awarded $7.5 million for HD research, and we are excited to announce our 2025 recipients late this winter. In 2023, we formed our Transformative Research Award. So this is the largest funding mechanism that the HDF has ever had. These are $1 million awards given over 2 years. In 2023, we awarded 2 of these awards, one to a team led by Dr. Bev Davidson, and another to a team led by Dr. Ricardo Moro-Pinto. And recently, in 2024, we awarded 1 Transformative Research Award to the collaboration between Drs. Andrew Yu and Osama Al-Dalama. But funding great science is only one component of a research project. In my mind, a research project isn't over until the people that need that information most have it. And in my mind, that's HD families. And so another hat that I wear is as co-editor-in-chief of HD Buzz. I hope a lot of you in this audience have heard of HD Buzz, but if you haven't, this is a news website. It's about HD research and HD clinical trials. It's written in plain language by scientists for the greater HD community. Our goal is to make HD science easy for everyone to understand so that HD families can be informed and make decisions. HD Buzz was started in 2010 by Drs. Ed Wild and Jeff Carroll, and then in 2020 they brought in extra people to share some of the load, and then in 2024 they officially let go of the back of the bike and passed the reins over to myself and Dr. Rachel Harding. And I can tell you that Rachel and I are incredibly committed to HD Buzz, and we're incredibly committed to ensuring that HD families have the information that they need. Because I know the mission of HD Buzz really speaks to how I felt when I first found out HD runs in my family. You know, I just wanted to know what was going on out there. I wanted to know what the research was, but more than anything, I wanted to know that there were people that were working to get us closer to a treatment for HD. And so that's exactly what HD Buzz does. We translate the science so that HD families have that information. And I will tell you, as Victor alluded to, 2024 has been a very busy year because there has been a lot of hope in the clinic. And I'm excited to share that with you. But before we get there, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So we're going to have a quick biology lesson. I'm going to take you back to your high school Bio 101 class, and we are going to briefly go over the central dogma of molecular biology. So this has been covered nicely, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. And so the central dogma states that we all have genes that are transcribed into message, also called RNA, and that RNA is translated into protein. And so your protein is the functional unit of your cell. This is what gets stuff done. And an approach that a lot of companies are using is something called Huntington lowering. What they're all trying to do with this approach is lower the Huntington message, because without the message, there is no protein. And so this follows a very reasonable hypothesis in HD biology, and that is that the expanded copy of the Huntington gene creates a toxic form of that protein. And that protein becomes a nefarious player in the cell, leading to all sorts of harm. And if we can lower that, hopefully we can preserve brain cell health and improve signs and symptoms of Huntington. So it's a very reasonable hypothesis to follow. Okay. So now, hopefully we are all on the same page so we can get to the good stuff, the hope that we've seen in the clinic. And so Victor talked a lot about the details of this, so I'm going to skim this at a kind of higher level, so thank you for that wonderful primer. But over the summer, we had really 4 major clinical trial updates from potentially disease-modifying treatments that were all good news. And so this has been a really exciting summer. The first was from Wave Life Sciences. They're testing their drug, it's called Wave 003, in a trial called Select HD. So this is delivered via spinal injection, and what's unique is that it's allele selective. So like Victor mentioned, it's specifically targeting that expanded copy. This is a phase 1/2 trial, so it's an early trial. It's specifically designed to look at safety. So that's the primary outcome of this trial. And what we learned this summer is that overall it appears to be safe and well tolerated. So that's great. First box checked. But what's also important is that this is the first time that we have any information from a trial that's shown that we can specifically target the expanded copy of Huntington. And so this is a really big milestone for the HD community, because if we find out in 2 years that we really need to go after the expanded copy and leave the unexpanded copy alone, we now have this capability, and we know that we have that from this trial. And while this trial was primarily designed to look at safety, they looked at different metrics of clinical measures to try and get hints about if this will work. They can't conclude anything from this because the trial is not large enough. But encouragingly, what they see is that there may be slowing of signs of Huntington's. And so that is very exciting. But again, small trial, primarily for safety. We need more data to conclusively determine if this is true. We also have positive clinical trial news from uniQure. So this is the one, AMT-130, delivered via brain surgery through 6 separate injections into the brain. This is a gene therapy, so this is a high risk, high reward. The high reward is that, in theory, it's a one and done. You just need this treatment once, and in theory, Huntington will be lowered for life. But it's a brain surgery, and once it's in your brain, you can't get it out. And so any effects of this drug, whether good or bad, they're permanent. So understandably, uniQure is rolling this out very conservatively, very slowly, and they're following these people for a long time. And the data release that we got this summer was a 2-year follow-up. And what we found is that when people were given this drug 2 years ago, things overall appeared to still be safe and well tolerated. They too looked at different metrics of clinical measures to try and get hints about if it's working. And they too saw that it may be slowing signs and symptoms of HD. And that, at the end of the day, these clinical measurements against HD beyond NFL, beyond even targeting Huntington, if we have a drug that is able to modify clinical symptoms, that's the golden ticket. That's what we want. But this is a small trial, so more data is needed. PTC Therapeutics. So I think I like Victor's analogy of the stop sign better, but what I have used in the past is this storybook. And so this is the oral splice modulator. You can take it as a pill. If you had a storybook, a fairy tale, and it was the end page, moved up right after Once Upon a Time, there's no middle part. It's not great. You're going to throw it out. The same thing happens in the cell. It works to rearrange the entire message of Huntington. The cell's like, this is a very boring story, and it doesn't make this protein. So they have a trial called Pivot HD, and it's designed to test their drug, PTC 518, which we learned at this meeting is now called Votoplam. So I'm going to try to remember to say Votoplam instead of PTC 518, which I feel is it's a confident name, which is a good thing. All right. So 2 big takeaways from the summer data release. Number 1 is that levels of that biomarker that Victor talked about called NFL, that seemed to remain steady. You'll remember he showed levels tend to rise as HD progresses, but when levels remain steady, people think that might mean that brain cell health is improving, and so that's a very good thing. Second big takeaway was again related to clinical measures. They show data that seems to suggest that Votoplam may be slowing progression of some of these clinical metrics. So again, a small trial and we need more data, but this is very encouraging. And these are hints about what Votoplam could potentially be doing. And so they're planning a phase 3 trial that's coming. Lastly, Skyhawk, which Victor also mentioned, so they carried out a phase 1 trial in Australia. They have a drug that's called Sky 0515. It's very, very similar to Votoplam. So far, they've only tested this in, quote, healthy volunteers, which is people that do not have the gene for HD. This is just the first arm of this phase 1 clinical trial. What we know is in those people, it appears to be safe and well tolerated. And what we also know is the more drug they give, the more they're able to lower Huntington. And so that's an important point, because that shows that the effect that they're seeing is because of the drug. It seems like an obvious point, but it's not, and people have to test that. And another good point is that it's very potent. So they're able to give just a little bit of this drug and lower Huntington quite a bit. So if they find they need to titrate that up, if they need to lower Huntington more, they're able to do that with this drug. And so now with this good news, they're moving to the second arm of this phase 1 trial, which is to test in people that have the gene for HD. This will still be, the primary outcome will still be safety, but if that is all good, they're going to start their phase 2 trial pretty soon, from what I understand, maybe as early as 2025, the first months. And so, individually, what we've learned this summer is that there's a lot of good news from different clinical trials. And I think there's room here for cautious optimism. And I'm not saying that because of a single clinical trial release. I'm saying that because when you look at all of this together, what we're starting to understand is that maybe Huntington lowering as an approach could be successful. Each one of these updates is very exciting on their own, but for me, the most exciting news of 2024 is that when you start to look at it together, the totality of what this all means is that Huntington lowering as an approach could get us to a disease-modifying drug for HD, and that is incredibly exciting. So please take out your phones and take a picture of this slide. I think this is a really fantastic summary of these 2024 Huntington lowering updates. This was made by a friend and fellow HD researcher, Dr. Tam Mayuri. I think she does a fabulous job, right? This is really easy to understand. And I want to note that these meh emoji faces that are under those clinical metrics, those aren't there because the results were bad. Those are there because we don't have enough data. And so, yeah, we don't have a smiley face, but we don't have a frowny face, and that's really encouraging. And so I've really focused in this section on these Huntington lowering trials because that's really what's furthest in the clinic right now, but there is so much more going on in the HD space. What you're seeing right now are the names of pharmaceutical companies that have either had a presence at an HD conference, they've made a public commitment to working on HD, or they have an ongoing clinical trial. And I can tell you, actually, this is already outdated because I met someone from a company whose name isn't on this slide. So when I go home, there's going to be even more names on this slide. But what I hope you can appreciate is that this is a really rich space, and there's a lot of people that are very committed to working on Huntington's. And beyond the clinical trials that I mentioned, there's also people working in these companies that aren't in trials yet, but they're headed there. And I think those are the companies that provide hope in experiments, because they're currently working in cell and animal models, and they're moving toward the clinic. And so I know I mentioned Huntington lowering already, which is already in the clinic, but what's exciting is that people are improving ways that we can target Huntington. So people are still exploring ways that we can target Huntington. And the first company I'll mention here is Lattice Bio. So they're working to improve gene therapy strategy. So right now, this would require 6 different injections into the deep area of the brain with a relatively large amount of liquid. Lattice has a technology that would allow them to get that down to a single injection with a single drop of liquid for the same brain area coverage. And so this would be a really big advancement in this area. They were actually part of the team that received one of the 2023 HDF Transformative Research Awards. So hopefully we will be hearing more from them about that soon. There's a company called Incisive Genetics that has a technique called lipid nanoparticles. And these are essentially little bubbles that you can put medications in, those fuse with the cell to deliver that medication. And so they are working on doing this for Huntington's. And the big advantage of these lipid nanoparticles is that you can make them in a lot larger quantity, a lot faster, and for a lot cheaper. And so there's a lot of advantages for working with these. I'll also mention Atalanta Therapeutics and Alnylam Pharmaceuticals. They're working on a technique called RNA interference, or RNAi, and this is essentially a way for people to lower Huntington that takes advantage of the cell's own molecular machinery. So they're all working on moving their approaches toward the clinic. And then Victor mentioned somatic expansion. This has been a really hot topic in HD research, so some of you may have heard about it. It's that perpetual expansion of the CAG repeat. And so there are two companies that are really working in this area right now, Argenta and Locus 23. And what's exciting is that these molecules could be taken as a pill. And both of these companies are working on different proteins within the somatic expansion pathway, but their goal is the same. Their goal is to control this perpetual expansion of the CAG repeat to hopefully improve brain cell health. And excitingly, we found out very recently that Locus 23 received $43 million to advance this drug for HD, and so hopefully that will go a long way toward getting this in the clinic. Another interesting approach that I feel like not a lot of people talk about at conferences are PROTACs. I think these are super cool. So this is essentially a little tag that you can add onto a protein that tells the cell to send it to the molecular trash bin. So this is like if we're cleaning out our house, we have an old bin of clothes and we put a tag on it to send to donation. So you can put this on a Huntington protein and it gets lowered essentially. There's a company called Arvinas who's working on this, and so far they're testing this in mouse models, but what they've shown is that they can get their PROTACs to the brain, which is the first hurdle when you're working with a brain disease. So hopefully that's advancing as well. Another technique I get asked about a lot are stem cells. And so there are people that are working on cell replacement therapies to replace neurons that are lost in HD. And there's essentially two ways you can do this. You could either add stem cells to the brain and turn those into neurons, or you could convert cells that are in the brain that aren't vulnerable in HD into neurons. And so there are people taking both of these approaches. There's an international consortium called Stem Cells for Huntington's Disease that works to facilitate these stem cell-based therapies for HD. And then the companies working in this area, there's New Excel Therapeutics. So they're taking the approach of adding molecular factors to the brain and converting support cells into neurons. And those support cells aren't vulnerable. They exist in the brain and they divide. So turning them into neurons seems like a reasonable approach. Separately, an academic lab run by Don Cleveland at University of California, San Diego, they're taking a similar approach, so converting support cells into neurons. And then the other way that people can do this is by adding stem cells to the brain. And so a company called Sana Biotech is doing this, as is Leslie Thompson from University of California, Irvine. So she's working to add neural stem cells to the brain and convert those to neurons. And she actually shared at the recent HDF conference that they're working to move this toward the clinic, and they're gearing up to start a phase 1/2 trial. And so I really hope that on HD Buzz you're going to hear more about that trial soon. But I feel like it's really these stem cell projects that are currently in academic labs, but they're bridging their way to the clinic, that really highlight how we get ideas from concept to clinic. Because all of the projects that I've mentioned, all of the clinical trials from all of the companies, they all started as an idea. And that's really what feeds the clinical trial pipeline. And so watching some of the cool science that's going on in the labs right now is a window into what is headed toward the clinic, and it's a window into what is headed toward companies that could turn into future clinical trials. Because there's not only a ton of companies working on HD, there's a ton of academic labs that are working in this space as well. And so I think these are the projects that really provide hope in ideas. And so I'm sure all of you know, this technology explosion over the past 10 years has turned all of our cell phones from flip phones into supercomputers, but it doesn't stop there. It also advanced the techniques that we're using in the lab. And so I think one of the biggest areas that was affected is how we analyze cells. And so before about 10 years ago, if you wanted to look at levels of genes and proteins in a brain sample, you would basically take that brain sample and just look at in a chunk of brain. But now, what people can do is look at levels of genes and proteins in each individual cell within that brain sample. And so this is the difference between looking at a beach and describing what you see. So you might be able to say the sand is tan and the sand is round, but if you were to put a sample of that sand under the microscope, you now get a lot more information. So you're seeing maybe it's little pieces of rock or fragments of shell. Maybe some of these pieces are actually purple or blue or yellow. You're getting a lot more information, and you can learn a lot more about the beach at this level of analysis. And so this is the difference between the way that people were looking at tissue samples 10 years ago and the way people are looking at them now. The information we're getting is much richer, and it can tell us a lot more. And this really allows scientists to transform how samples are processed and what we're learning. People are also working to improve delivery strategies. So I told you about Lattice Bio, who have transformed maybe 6 shots into 1 shot in the brain. But brain surgery is obviously no one's ideal way to receive a treatment. Unfortunately, it's the only way to receive a gene therapy right now, but people are working on other ways to deliver drugs for HD. One of those ways is actually nasal delivery of drugs, so things that you could inhale to get a drug to the brain. And there actually are already FDA-approved medications that are given this way. So think Narcan, the opioid overdose drug, or there's even epilepsy medications that are delivered this way. And people are also working on this for Huntington's. And then another way to improve delivery of drugs could be on something called focused ultrasound to open the blood-brain barrier. And so you can think of your blood-brain barrier like a brick wall. It keeps potentially harmful things from your blood, like viruses or even medications, out of your brain. But this is obviously an added complication if you want to get medication into your brain. And so this is why a lot of drugs are delivered either through spinal injections or brain surgery. But a way around that would be to temporarily open the blood-brain barrier, let the drug in, and then close it. And people can do this with an ultrasound. They focus the ultrasound in one area along with the drug and let it in. And so this is currently being tested in clinical trials for cancer in the clinic, but people are also working on this for HD. And it's these types of studies, these are currently being done in cell and animal models that really help feed the clinical trial pipeline, because it's the basic research of these labs that translates into the trials that I've talked about today. Because even with all of the trials that are going on, the pace of research in HD has not slowed. If anything, it's only gained momentum. Because the field will work like we have no treatment in hand until we do have an FDA-approved treatment. And after that, people will work to improve that treatment. And so HD research will always be going on. First, to find a treatment, and then to improve that treatment. But to do that, basic research needs funding. And a way to ensure that we have basic research to feed this clinical trial pipeline is to support organizations like the Hereditary Disease Foundation. Again, our sole mission is to find and fund promising research for HD. And if you're interested in learning more about any of this, or HD research in general, or HD clinical trials, I highly recommend that you go to HD Buzz. If you'd like to hear about all the latest research, but you just want it in a more simpler, easy to understand way, HD Buzz is definitely for you. Because research is certainly complicated, and HD Buzz is here to ensure that you understand it better. Because without any additional complications, I realize that Huntington's is certainly hard enough. And so if you need support and a community to lean on, the HD community is really fabulous. We have great organizations in this space. A lot of these were mentioned during the panel session today, so I'll cover them briefly. But we have the HD Youth Organization, or HDYO. This is specifically targeted at young people in the HD space, empowering, supporting, and educating them. Hopefully, every single person in this room has heard of HDSA. I've been going to HDSA events since I was in high school. They are committed to improving the lives of everyone affected by HD, and they have various support groups across the country. HD Reach works to improve the care and quality of life for those affected by HD, and Help for HD provides information, education, and resources for the HD community. And beyond that, there are also organizations that specifically provide services for the HD community. So Help Cure HD provides IVF services for HD families. HD Genetics provides virtual genetic counseling and testing, and can help people connect with clinical trials. And then, of course, the Huntington Study Group, which works to accelerate treatments for HD. And all of these organizations have a booth outside, so I definitely recommend connecting with them. Because we're very, very lucky in the HD space to have all of these fantastic organizations. And even though we all may have a different, unique mission, we really do all work together, because we realize that we all have a common mission. We all want to advance HD treatments for the HD community. And so if you want to do something, I highly recommend that you go to HDSA's HD Trial Finder. This is a great way to try and find HD trials that might be right for you or someone in your family. This allows you to search for HD-specific trials that are in your area. But I certainly realize that participating in clinical trials could be daunting. Or maybe you want to participate, but you aren't symptomatic. Or maybe you don't want to know your gene status. Or maybe you know your gene status and you're negative, but you still want to participate. The answer is that you can. There are observational studies like Enroll HD, and there are others that are strictly observational, so no drug is given. These are literally designed to just watch people live and age and see how that might be different in people with Huntington's. Currently, there are over 21,000 participants in Enroll HD from 157 sites at 23 countries. I can tell you this is massive participation from any community. And it's participation like this that really draws pharmaceutical companies into the space. Because number one, they realize they have a lot of data that they can look at. But number two, they realize that the HD community is really committed to ensuring that we get a treatment for HD. And so participating in these observational studies like Enroll is really, really critical. And this is something that you can do today to ensure that we get to a treatment faster. Because I think that is the number one question I am asked. What can I do today for HD? And so there are things that can be done. I wish that woman that asked the question about sleep was still here. I'll have to connect with her later if she's not in the room. But there are things you can do today to improve the quality of lives of people living with HD. Many people have insomnia or fragmented sleep to have HD, and there are sleep studies that are going on. Zana Voisey from Cambridge is running the HD sleep study. It's been tracking over 40 people with Huntington's for 12 years. Dr. Diana Rosas at Mass General is also looking at sleep, as is Jenny Morton from Cambridge. So a lot of people are researching sleep, and they're actually working on specific sleep medications for people with Huntington's. So there is a lot of research going on in sleep. But getting a good night's sleep is something that can really improve the quality of life. And I think, honestly, I give this advice more than any other, and I know it's boring, and I know you've all heard it, but diet and exercise is really important. And it's actually a healthy lifestyle. Living a healthy lifestyle is the only thing that has been scientifically proven to slow symptoms of HD. And so this is always the first advice I give that people kind of begrudgingly roll their eyes about. But eat well, exercise, take care of yourself, just be healthy. It's perhaps unsurprising that being healthy is good for your brain. And so this is actually something that can really go a long way for improving symptoms of HD. And we can also consider racial disparity in HD. There was a study that was recently published that showed Black people with HD are diagnosed on average 1 year later than white people living with HD. And so ensuring that every single person from the HD community is represented in HD care and research, including people from historically marginalized populations, can really improve the quality of lives of people here and now that are living with HD. And it's worth noting, actually, that this study was done using data from Enroll HD. And so that just goes to show that the time, energy, and effort that people who participate in Enroll HD is being put to good use. It's helping us understand HD better right now. Because the faster that we understand HD, the more that we understand HD, the faster we will get to a treatment. And so with that, I encourage all of you to please connect with both the HDF and HD Buzz. You can go to our website, you can get on our mailing lists. Please sign up for the HDF webinars. You can see my face again and watch me talk to HD researchers. But more than anything, just stay connected. I have my email down here. I love talking to HD families. I'm more than happy to answer any questions, so please feel free to reach out in any way that works for you. Thanks.